Table is a shared space for everyone who comes to play, and everyone feels welcome. So I just dropped that into chat. And now we the name of several titles and products within the TTRPG world. That is because the dungeon is sort of an iconic place and venue for adventures to happen and stories of heroism to be told. So let's talk about designing and creating our own dungeons for our tabletop role-playing games. Well, the first thing to keep in mind when we're talking about building dungeons, heavy air quotes, is that a dungeon can take many forms. There's, of course, the traditional subterranean lair, the Diablo or Torchlight sort of style dungeon, the classic Dungeons and Dragons dungeon, where it's deep underground and everything is dark and monsters are guarding treasure and there's sort of labyrinthine twists and turns and secret doors and all of that. But a dungeon can also be a castle. It can be a hedge maze or a mansion or a wizard's tower. Whatever shape your dungeon takes, there are really three key elements you need to keep in mind for what defines what is a dungeon. Sorry, like I said, few technical snafus. The first, a dungeon should be a specific location, a specific confined location, separate from the rest of the world. It's important that the players are going to a specific place, and that place is somehow self contained. That's the first element you need to keep in mind. Secondly, a dungeon should be filled with challenges for the player characters to overcome. That's the adventure part. That's the part everyone enjoys and remembers, is overcoming the obstacle. And thirdly, the player characters must believe that the dungeon is a means to acquiring something of value. Whether it is or not, they need to believe it because that's their onus, their impetus to go into the dungeon in the first place. Now, when it comes to assembling a dungeon, once we have in mind the sort of mutations of form that it can undertake, when we go into actually building our dungeon, it's a lot like playing with Legos or Minecraft or any other similar but not trademark infringing construction game. The key is learning what pieces you have to play with and then assembling them in ways that are going to surprise and excite your players. So let's talk about some dungeon pieces that we can play with. The first, and one of the most classic, is the guarded room. For example, you enter a poorly lit chamber, 20 feet in diameter. Opposite from where you've entered, you see a closed and barred door leading further into the dungeon. Standing in front of the door, roused by the sound of your approach, you see a hulking figure, barely clothed in scraps of cloth and wielding a massive, pitted and blood-stained great club. It is an ogre, and she stands poised to stop you and your party from adventuring further. Like this example, a guarded room, it can be a chamber of any size. That's really variable. But the important thing is, in this chamber, there's a guard, or multiple guards. And this guard must be defeated in order to gain whatever it is that they are guarding. That can be simply passage deeper into the dungeon, it could be a treasure, it could be a clue, it could be something of benefit to the players. They want it, the guard is stopping them, they have to defeat the guard to get it. The guard can be any type of creature or group of creatures, and like most any combat encounter, the players are free to approach it in about any way that they want. In the example I read to you, they could attempt to slay the ogre. That's your standard murder hobo response. Or they could try to bribe or persuade her to just let them pass by. They could try deceiving her or use some kind of enchantment magic to ensorcel her mind. The player's only impetus here, their really only onus, is to render the guard impotent. However they want to do that, it's up to them. So they have freedom in multiple different ways of approaching this particular challenge. The next piece in our playset is the trapped room. And these can be some of the most insidious dungeon pieces, and also some of the most memorable. As an example, you approach the next chamber and you hear a sound, a rhythmic whoosh, whoosh, whoosh of something large moving through the air. Coming to the precipice and gazing within, you see a narrow chamber, 10 feet wide and 30 feet long. At the opposite end of the chamber, you see a gleaming golden chest inset with precious gems that glimmer in the torchlight, and a lever set into the stonework beside it. You also see the source of that whooshing sound. A series of heavy, razor-sharp blades swing back and forth across the width of the chamber like the pendulum of a clock, each swinging at a different interval. You also see the remains of one unlucky individual who tried and failed to pass through the chamber. It seems they made it a full 10 feet before the blades cleft them at the waist. Now, the trapped room can again be a chamber of any size, and the important element here is it contains traps that the players must avoid. The traps can be obvious or concealed, and they can be designed to injure, to debilitate, to kill, or simply to inconvenience. Just it has to be something negative that the players want to try and avoid. And importantly, a good trapped room combines multiple traps working in concert with one another. In the example that I read to you, there's actually two traps in that room, one obvious, one concealed. The obvious trap is, of course, the giant swinging blades that will cut you in half if you're not quick enough. The concealed trap, which the players might notice if they examine the corpse already lying in the chamber, is that some of the tiles in this room have been treated with an adhesive. And this particular adventurer who got stuck and chopped in half fell upon one of those tiles and could not free themselves fast enough. So in that example, I've given them a little clue that if they examine the body of the person who's already died here, they'll see that there's something else going on beyond the obvious. Our third dungeon piece that we can play with is the puzzle room. Now, as an example, you enter what appears to be a lavish observatory. A large telescope dominates the space pointed up towards the heavens. To your right, you see a star chart of the southern hemisphere affixed to the wall, though a large portion in the shape of a diamond appears to be cut out. On your left, you see a desk with a number of astrological tools and a hastily scrawled note that reads, "The serpent hides from the rampant stallion's trampling hoof." Now, a puzzle room can, again, be a chamber of any size, but it has to contain some kind of puzzle that the players must solve to gain a benefit. That benefit could be unlocking a passage further into the dungeon, it could be a useful item or a piece of information that will aid them later. The puzzle can be a riddle, or a logic puzzle, or a physical puzzle, or some type of other challenge. It just needs to be primarily cognitive. And incorrect solutions may have negative consequences, depending on how mean you want to be. If you want to give them leeway to make a few wrong guesses, or if you want to say they make a wrong guess, something bad happens, is further impetus for them to make sure that they're getting it right before they start just pushing random buttons. And then our fourth piece, and this is something that I think is usually overlooked, is the challenge room. Here's your example. You find yourself at a T-junction. The halls progress to your left and right. Directly in front of you, though, you see a grotesque statue holding a spear of polished black metal. There's a noticeable seam where the statue's head meets its body, indicating the two are separate pieces. The head is currently turned to look down the left passageway. Now, a challenge room can be, again, a chamber of any size, and it contains a test for the player's skills and abilities. And completing this test earns them some kind of benefit. In the example, the player simply needs to make a strength ability check, to try and twist the gargoyle's head. If they do, it releases the spear in its grasp, and the spear will give them some sort of benefit later on in the dungeon, if they are able to procure it. So, those are our pieces that we can start playing with to put our dungeon together. But before we get to that, before we actually get to the fun mixing, matching, putting pieces together, let's talk about the story of our dungeon. Let's talk about the history behind it. Let's talk about why it's here in the first place. We need to figure out who built this dungeon, when, what purpose was it made to serve, and what purpose does it serve now? These are all vital questions we need to answer before we start putting rooms into place. Let's start with the most important question, the one that's going to help us flesh out what this dungeon is, how it's structured, and what it looks like. What purpose was our dungeon built to serve? Was it built as a prison or a vault? Was it a home or maybe a laboratory or a temple? Maybe it was built as a trial of some kind, or maybe it was a tomb. Each of these answers will shape how the dungeon is constructed. And again, dungeon does not necessarily mean subterranean or labyrinthian, as I covered before. It could be any kind of structure. Once we figured out why our dungeon was built, we can start to consider how long ago it was built. Is it new? Is it ancient? Has it been passed down from one owner to the next, cared for throughout generations? Or was it left abandoned? Was it forcibly taken? Thinking about the history of the dungeon is going to help us form a picture of what it looks like in the here and now, when the player characters encounter it. And we can sprinkle in little details and hints at the dungeon's history, or lack thereof, to give more richness of flavor and verisimilitude to the game. So, we know why our dungeon was built. We have an idea of its history, or at least the important parts. You don't need to be comprehensive, unless of course you really want to invest in the minutiae of your world building, and please, feel free. But now we need to consider what purpose the dungeon serves now. Who lives there now? Why do they live there? This is the final piece we need to solve before we can start putting the dungeon together. And this is going to inform the kind of encounters and the kind of creatures that the players are going to run. So, with that sort of preliminary out of the way, let's build a dungeon. Star may not be an actual dungeon. So, we need to start answering some questions. The first one, of course, what purpose was our dungeon built to serve? Was it a prison, home, a temple, a trial, a vault, or some other purpose? Autumn, hello, welcome. You're just in time. So, people in chat, my fine friends on the internet, what sort of purpose do we think our dungeon was built to serve? All right, a temple. So our dungeon is a temple. All right, so what was it a temple to? Was it a temple to a deity, to a evil entity, a cosmic force, a philosophy, an ideal? Was it a temple school? What purpose did this temple serve? Temple of a philosophical school. I like that. I like the idea of this having once been a school at some time. That already gives me a lot of great ideas about the kind of things that we can find. Okay. Avatar: The Last Airbender. You know what? Pop cultural references are great places to get inspiration for your games. So that's wonderful. Um, oh, hi, Heather. Good to see you in chat. So let's decide now. We have our temple school of a philosophical principle or ideal. How long ago was it built? Is it a very recently built school? Was it built generations ago within, a few lifetimes? Is it from the long, long ago, centuries old, or is it even from a previous age? Is it full of knowledge and mystery lost to time? We like another age? Okay. Okay, so it's built in another age. What does this mean? Well, for starters, it probably means that if this place is full of books or tablets or knowledge, it's going to be in a language nobody reads, because this is a dead, long gone civilization. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's going to add an extra layer, a little bit of layer of difficulty for the PCs trying to understand what's going on here, because it's from a completely different culture. All right, and now let's decide who lives in our temple school now, and why do they live there? If this is in, a long lost age, could be it's been taken over by archaeologists trying to uncover its secrets. It could be that there are just random roaming entities, nomads who have moved into the place because, hey, it's a building, it's a place we can live, it's fairly fortified. Is there some kind of supernatural element that's taken over here? Is there maybe an evil cult that's delving to find secrets? Who lives in our dungeon? Okay, so we've got some archaeologists and hidden protectors. Ooh, I like that. Dun 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 dun. So, there is some kind of remnant, someone who maybe remembers why this place was built, or knows something of the people who built it. They have more knowledge, but just enough knowledge that they want to keep this place secret and hidden. And you've got these archaeologists coming in looking to discover things because they should be in a museum, and there's a bit of conflict there, and that's good because that is going to give us the jumping off point for introducing our characters to the dungeon as well when we start thinking about plot lines and hooks to get the players invested in this dungeon and get them through the door. All right, so we've got our baseline history of the dungeon, the story of the dungeon. It's a temple school of a philosophical purpose built from another age that has been lost to time but recently rediscovered by archaeologists who have come into conflict with the hidden protectors still within this temple school, trying to stop anyone from learning its secrets. All right, so now we can actually start building our dungeon. And we have, of course, our pieces: the guarded room, the trapped room, the puzzle room, the challenge room. So let's start from room number one, our entryway into the dungeon. And this is going to be our first impression of the dungeon. So, what do we want to put here? Well, I'm thinking if we have. I'm picturing just in my own head like a secluded mountaintop with a temple on it, sort of a Machu Picchu kind of situation. And there's an encampment that's been built outside of it where these archaeologists are set up and have begun doing their exploration and their cataloging, and they have lots of little brushes that they are, wiping the dirt and dust of ages away from their precious samples and things that they have collected. And then we have the looming temple itself, and the large front doors. And just beyond these doors, we have the first room of our dungeon. Now, keeping in mind that this is a temple school, there are a number of different rooms you'd expect to find in that kind of building. You'd expect there to be a dormitory where the students would reside. There would have been kitchens, there would have been rooms for instruction, probably a library, probably a very extensive library, probably a self-contained garden. If this is a very remote location, they would have had to have grown and provided their own foodstuffs. So, personally, I'm thinking that the first thing that the players are going to encounter when they pass through these gates is going to be a there's a couple of different ways. We could just open up onto like a large campus and basically say this is sort of a walled campus situation where there are separate buildings. We could say that there is an antechamber that they have to pass through to get to the main campus of the temple school. We could say that it is just a self-contained building in and of itself, that there aren't really any outdoor elements to it. Let's see. What does chat think? My lovely chat room. You like the idea of a walled school campus? I'm kind of liking that as well. Okay. So we're gonna conceptualize this as being a walled-in campus with separate buildings and sort of an open courtyard connecting all of them. So the first thing that our players are going to encounter when they get into our dungeon is they're going to pass through the main gates and enter into the courtyard. Now, what would be awaiting them in the courtyard that would present them some kind of challenge? Would there be guards there, right at the entryway, waiting to stop them? Would there be traps, perhaps? Would there be a puzzle of some kind? It's possible we could even have a puzzle that you have to solve to open the front door. That's possible. We could put challenges. Chad, I'm not going to dignify you with that. Statue guard hall monitors. Okay. Okay, I like this idea. So as our players walk into this courtyard, there are a number of animated statues lining around the courtyard area, and these would have been designed as protection, as well as perhaps keeping order for the school when it was still functioning. Okay, so we're going to say that our first room is a guarded room. I actually really like that, Heather. I like the idea of this big statue coming to life and just demanding a hall pass from the adventurers. So yes, so these statues animate and they demand to see the player's hall pass. Why are you out in the courtyard in the middle of the day? You should be tending to your duties somewhere. And the players will have to. I keep bumping my microphone. The players will have to in some way deal with that, either deceiving the animated statues, fighting them, through making a persuasive argument. Who knows? But that's our first room of our dungeon, and the first challenge that our players are going to have to overcome. Now, from here, because we have multiple buildings, we're kind of already setting up a branching path system for our dungeon, where the players could go in multiple different directions. Now, we could choose to narrow their options by saying, well, certain buildings have locked doors, and you have to go to this building to get the key, and then you can go into that building and set up a chain of events for them to follow. Or we can just leave things open and allow them to explore to their heart's desire. So, um, let's move on and think about the next room we want to set up for our dungeon. If this is the main courtyard area is our main room, let's start thinking about one of the specific buildings that we're going to have in this courtyard, and players getting into that and what that is going to be like for them. So let's set up room 2. So room 2, what could this be? This could be the library. We could be the dormitory. It could be an administrative hall. Where do we think we want to work on next? What's the next destination our player characters are going to come to? Okay. So the players get to the dining hall. What kind of room is this going to be? I can't imagine that the inhabitants of this place would have set up that many traps in their dining room. necessarily. This is probably going to be more of a challenge room. We can set up some various challenges to have the player characters try to overcome, and if they do, something beneficial will happen. Ultimately, this isn't going to be like a main room. That doesn't feel like the right word, but it's not going to be a major stopping point in their adventure. But it's something that if they pop in here, they can get something cool. So let's see, what kind of challenge can we set up in the dining hall? Well, let's see, what would be in the dining hall? The dining hall is probably attached to the kitchen. And if this is an ancient place, probably not going to be much left in terms of food stores for them to take, but there might still be a fuel source of some kind, perhaps? Maybe a bit of information, maybe a key? There's going to be something useful that they could find here that's going to help them in their journey through the temple school. I think everyone's got their thinking caps on. I'm going to say there's going to be a key hidden in the dining hall somewhere, and with a good enough investigation check, the players are going to be able to find it, and it's going to unlock something later on in the adventure. Alright, so let's move on to room 3. We've gone into the dining hall, we found this mysterious key. We have no idea what it unlocks yet, but surely it's going to be useful for something later. And then we get to the dormitory. The dormitory is our next section of the dungeon to explore, and we're going to have, imagining a multi-tiered building, several rooms, bunk rooms for the students to have stayed in, and an RA's room, of course. Why not? There would be some kind of supervisor or dormitory attendant who would have lived in the dormitories to keep the students in line. And yeah, maybe the key we found in the dining room goes to one of their rooms, and that unlocks something useful for us. So, let's just say... But there should also be something else here in the dormitory, something interesting and exciting. What could we have here? Well, maybe there's a ghost. Maybe this place is haunted. Maybe... a ghost. A homework lab? A haunted homework lab? Ooh, I kind of like that. Yes, good. Also, some flavor and richness there. Thank you, Tessa. Tapestries depicting some history. Yes, of course. So, ooh, I like that, Heather. A student died while experimenting. Um, awesome. Okay. So this would be, oh, this would be a guarded room. All right, so we have our homework lab in the dormitory, haunted by an angry student who died doing their homework assignment. What was the homework assignment in? Some sort of, let's see, this is a school to some manner of philosophy or philosophical ideal. I guess it's a good time as any to start hammering at that out. What would that be? What kind of assignments or experiments or research would these students have been doing that one of them might have died doing it? This could be some manner of magical philosophy. This could be some manner of divine or spiritual philosophy. Let's see. Okay. So we're getting some ideas about philosophies of life and death and how they intertwine with one another, the metaphysical sort of aspects of that dichotomy. All right. Maybe the student was undertaking some manner of meditation or philosophical practice on the nature of death and got a little too into it, so much that they actually thought themselves to death. Who knows, it could happen. So, all right. They could have a haunted, or a, oh, what are they called? Like, notebook. I think there's a specific word for it. Sort of the notebook that they took all of their notes in, except if you read it, you go insane and fall over dead, like the joke from Monty Python. Okay, so we've got our dormitory, and we're also going to flavor into the dormitory a lot more of this iconography and, with tapestries and engravings, a lot more of an ancient stylus, yes. A lot more of the flavor of what this school was all about and the kind of philosophies that they were teaching and absorbing and researching here. So, fantastic. And maybe this is even sort of a clue of, something larger that's going on in the plot of this school, and why perhaps these archaeologists are so interested in it, or perhaps what lurks at the very heart of it. So, we've done our courtyard, our dining hall, our dormitory. I think we need to start talking about the actual main hall of the temple itself. So, getting into the temple proper. Getting into the temple proper, I'm imagining there being some kind of test. Maybe it's a puzzle, or maybe it's a passcode of some kind. Something is going to challenge anyone who walks into this temple to prove that they actually belong here. So, what would we call this? A puzzle room? Maybe a trapped room, perhaps? I think there's definitely going to be traps involved if you're not able to demonstrate your worthiness to enter this place. There's definitely going to be some kind of trap. So let's think about that. And this can also be something we retroactively tie back in. Maybe there's a clue in the dining hall or the dormitory about this trap. It says, if you go into the temple foyer, make sure you do this, or else why. So, let's go ahead and call this a trapped room. Okay, so this is sort of an intersection of a trapped room and a puzzle room. So to avoid the trap, you have to give the correct password. The password can be found in the dormitory, and there's also this riddle clue that prompts you for the password. This is where it's gonna get a little bit tricky though, because remember, we've established that this is from an ancient bygone era. That means whatever the clue might be, it's gonna be in a language our players just do not understand, unless someone's got a comprehend languages spell or what have you. So they're gonna be at a serious disadvantage here. Keeping that in mind, we will need to make sure that whatever this trap is, it's not too terribly lethal. Because they're already on the back foot, it's just not fair to put them up against something too terribly punishing. So, yeah, we'll just have to keep that in mind. It can be discouraging, perhaps, but it shouldn't just outright kill them. Could be symbolic, sure. some sort of visual clue. Yep, yep, and that's all things that we can go back in once we have our basic outline and sort of flesh out the exact details about it. Yeah, no TPKs on the first puzzle, unless that's the type of game you're running. If you're running a meat grinder game and that's what your players like, by all means, make it as deadly and as unfair as everyone enjoys. So, sorry about that. My push to talk, in case you haven't figured it out by now, is bound to the keyboard key B, which is why B's keep appearing on my screen every time I talk. So, coming off of the foyer, where are we going to next? We could go to a lecture hall, we could go to an office, we could go to... let's see, what are the sort of... a research lab, a storage room of some kind? Any kind of room that you can think of that would be in a school. The headmaster's office? I don't think we're there straight off the foyer. That's a good idea for a room later on in the dungeon, but straight in, I don't think we're gonna get quite there. A lecture hall? Okay. All right. So we have a lecture hall. Ooh, and I like that, Heather, that the professor office connected to the lecture hall. That's a good idea. Chaining one room to the next. So we have a lecture hall here in front of us. And again, this is a great place to pepper in more of that lore information about why is this school here? What was it built to teach? The kinds of research and philosophy and information that could be contained within it. But what challenge are the players going to face here? Well, I'm kind of thinking that this would be a good place to have a guarded room. We're just coming off of a trap puzzle room, and you don't want to have too many of the same things in a row. Variety is good. So what could be guarding this particular room? We could have... we could have more golems or automatons, but we already did that outside. We could have mimic school desks, possibly. We could have some kind of creature that was being used in the instruction for this particular school. Okay, so a creature that would have been studied here, and this being a... I like where you're going, Heather, and I think we can tweak this a little bit. I like the idea of, if we're talking about this is a school that studies the philosophy of life and death, then maybe we have some, maybe they were keeping some sample creatures that in some way illustrate that dichotomy. Maybe we've got some undead of some kind in this room, and they're being held in chambers that keep them sort of in stasis, but as luck would have it, those chambers start to fail as the adventurers come in, and now we've got ghouls or zombies or some kind of creature that are now being let loose into the school to attack our adventurers. And then room 6, the professor's office. I don't think we're going to put any kind of challenge in here. I think getting through the lecture hall was the challenge. And then in the professor's office, attached to it, there's going to be some kind of benefit in that getting past the undead wins them getting into the professor's office. So there's going to be something there. Probably another key, a useful item, perhaps, a piece of information. I'm just going to mark this down as treasure, basically. All right, so we are 6 rooms into building our dungeon, and it is unfortunately just about 5 o'clock, so I need to start wrapping things up. Thank you everyone for joining me for the premiere of Season 2. Ooh, artifact being studied. Autumn, that's amazing. I'm going to put that in the notes after I delete all my... So, thank you again so much, those of you who joined me in chat today. Thank you, Tessa, for running everything behind the screen on the stream. It is wonderful to be back doing Homebrew Studio once again. I am very excited for everything we're going to get into this season. We'll be back every Saturday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, right here on twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith. Before I go, I have to thank, and want to thank, it's not so much an obligation as it is an opportunity, to thank our wonderful sponsors. First of all, World Anvil, a wonderful online tool set for building your own worlds and homebrew material for your games. You can check them out at worldanvil.com and light up the forge. You can also check out our friends over at Die Hard Dice, the purveyors of the finest polyhedrals in the multiverse. dieharddice.com is where you want to go for all of your dice needs. They have fantastic, one-of-a-kind metal dice sets, none of which I have in reach, or I would show you just how amazingly pretty they are. Go to dieharddice.com. You can use the code HOMEBREW, I hope that's still active, I didn't actually check, to save 15% off your first or next order. It is a one-time use only code though. Show them some appreciation and let them know that we sent you. Thank you everyone for participating, and until next week, take care everybody.